I have a couple questions that came in, and I will scroll through the Twitter feed of hashtag Affordable College to look for additional questions. Why don't I start you off with a variation of the same question has actually come in a couple times already, and that is, you may know that earlier this year, the Schenker Institute hosted a conversation on what we call the academic precariat, the numbers of tenure-track college professors in the United States that are in serious decline, increasing numbers of college instructors taking out of the ranks of poorly paid, insecure adjunct positions. So clearly the connection there is that the rising cost of college education is not the result of what colleges and universities are paying the teaching force. So a couple different questions sort of coming off of this are, what is the connection, perhaps the insidious connection between the replacement of tenure-track faculty by low-paid, insecure adjuncts and the issue of college affordability? And then, therefore, what is causing the dramatic increase? What do you see as some of those push and pull factors causing the dramatic increase of the cost of a college education?
May I begin with that?
Okay.
As the faculty member here from Wisconsin that is currently undergoing a massive assault on our faculty, I understand we are the tenured faculty who are currently being attacked, but we are just the latest. And I think this is absolutely a major issue, and it's a spin. So college is not unaffordable today because of faculty costs, and if you were ever going to invest in anything in education, it would be the people who teach the students. So the major challenge, I must say, with the destabilization of the faculty is you are disrupting the people who actually fight for the affordability of higher education with the students. And the assault on tenure is a big deal because those of us who do hold tenure are the ones fighting the administration on the things that do make college unaffordable. Mm-hmm. So stripping me of my tenure and the colleagues around me who do that destabilizes the very people who advocate for the students and who currently can do so fearlessly, but are currently worried they're going to have to close their mouths. Mm-hmm. It is very clear that the real issue here is the action of the state legislatures, to some degree the action of some college administrators, a prestige war among institutions that aspire to be things other than focused on education, and the for-profits. Those are the issues. And we have to be able to say those things and to say so fearlessly on behalf of students and families, or we aren't going to get anywhere. But this is spin. This is not about making college affordable. This is about dictating the curriculum. And we have to call that out. And this is partly what Zakiya is talking about very kindly when she says quality, right? We do not, when we talk about making college really affordable, want it to be fast, cheap, and out of control. No. Right. We want it to be high quality, instructors and students together learning, sifting and winnowing their way through hard ideas and learning to think critically, which frankly is what the business sector says they want. They want people who can think, and you need faculty to work with students to advance those critical thinking skills. There is no replacement for that.
I think I think Sarah hit the nail on the head, right? But I think one thing that I would add from an organizing perspective that we are all locked into this race to the bottom that state legislators are driving, and I think corporate interests in higher education are driving. I think that without clearly identifying the shared self-interest between students and adjunct faculty, we aren't going to solve this crisis. So it is as simple as students talking to adjuncts about why they don't have offices, like physical offices for office hours. Mm-hmm. I think it's students and faculty or students and adjunct faculty talking about the student debt that adjuncts are currently repaying and that students are taking out. I think it's about students talking to students about why their professor makes $3,000 to teach a course. So I think really identifying what is in common, what the race to the bottom looks like, because it's affecting both students and faculty in different ways, but ultimately it's all the same race to the bottom. I think that's when we actually are able to build power and win.
The perennial question of why college costs so much.
Yeah.
And AAUP always does these faculty surveys of salaries, and you can pretty much see that faculty salaries have not increased in some out of control. Like, there's not a faculty salary and college tuition going up. What you see is, at public colleges anyway, state investment per pupil and tuition. So it's not a one-for-one thing, but it is the largest factor for the most, the 75% of students that are going to public colleges and universities. Now, I would note that there's a big difference between public colleges and private colleges here. And some of the stories that we hear about climbing walls and lazy rivers and things like that are usually not at your public college places. And the places where they are at public colleges, they should be ashamed of themselves, because they're trying to compete with these private colleges, which are essentially hedge funds with a nonprofit attached to them. Which is fine, but it's a different world to try to be in. That was not my description. I saw that on Vox.com about Yale, and I was like, that's a good description of it. It's like a hedge fund with a nonprofit attached.
That's great.
Co-signed.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, so also not surprisingly, there are a few questions that have come in about the role we can all play. And first, it looks sort of like the couple different variations of an education role we should be playing, educating folks, as well as the movement piece of the role. So I'll just sort of put this together in some respects. So again, specific to the first degree free movement, what next steps can we actually do? What are some concrete next steps? Beth, you actually had listed earlier a number of roles you thought people could play. If you even wanted to drill down on that some more, particularly what is the role folks can play in helping to organize student workers, for example, and then also. What is the role? And Zakiya, I do appreciate that you had aspirations to be a teacher. It's really never too late. We can.
I would love to.
We can work on that. That's right. But if you've spent some time thinking through, also what is the role a K-12 educator can play in advocating for college affordability, or actually, if any of you have that. I have some ideas on that. Clearly roles parents can play if you've thought prescriptively or constructively about that, or even, quite frankly, the role the business community can play if they are actually sincere about a well-trained, ready workforce. So, if you want to just kind of give some marching orders to all of us, that would be great.
Well, I've spent a lot of time giving this a lot of thought recently. I just completed a book manuscript. There'll be a new book out next year on making college affordable. And the conclusion section is actually rather lengthy and full of policy recommendations on exactly this. And I think that the challenge we face is that for some of us, college affordability feels like an emergency staring us in the face, especially if we're trying to repay loans. But for most Americans, it doesn't. Okay, it's something that's pretty far in the future, especially for parents of young children. It's something that's behind us for those that already have their degrees. And, I think that's one of our biggest challenges. And so I think you really have to go and talk with people about what's going to happen later. So I don't hear enough conversations in the kindergarten courses, to be quite frank. We have a lot of people who are very worried about the price of preschool, the price of early childhood. For the record, that typically consumes about 7% of your income annually. And we say that's unaffordable. College is into the 20 to 30 to 40% range. If they are worried about early childhood education and what that costs, they're going to be terrified by what higher education is going to cost. And instead of just saving for it, maybe they should be working to make it lower. Okay? So I think that that's a really important part of the conversation. I think that our teachers have a lot to say here. I think they know that despite the rhetoric, they're not doing a bad job. They're doing a perfectly good job. That the fact that the average entering undergraduate today has less skills than they used to is not about poor K-12 education. It is about the fact that people with lower skill levels go to college today when they didn't used to, partly because there's no place for them in the economy. Mm-hmm. And we know that technological change means there's more to learn today. So I think it's actually perfectly rational to say that after a century of 12 years of education, we're ready for 14. I think it's perfectly normal to say that there's more to learn, that we have lengthened childhood, that it takes longer to learn this new material, and that sometimes after those 12 years, you're going to need a little bit more. You might even take a break before you do it. I'd like to see our K-12 educators think about what those next 2 years really have to look like, and what forms they should take for people of different ages and stages of their lives. I do challenge the business community, and I do think we're seeing some step up, right? We're seeing some very interesting things out there. I support business efforts that allow their customers and their employees to choose where they go to college. I don't think they should all have to go online to get a degree. I do think they should be able to go locally. I think that's family supporting. I also think it's community supporting. I'd like to see them be able to attend in their local community college where they can go. And I think we should be talking to employers about making those opportunities affordable. And I think that we should be talking to those employers as well about helping to pay down some of this debt, because they are the ones who are benefiting from the skills that have been gained, especially by those who've completed their degrees. So I think those are some decent places to start. It is going to take a while. And I really hope that people don't harbor the idea that if we can't get it done in this Congress, it's not worth working on. Horace Mann began the movement for free public high school, and it took 80 years. We're not going to take 80 years, but we are going to do it, and we're going to do it over the long haul. And so being part of this conversation now, working in addition to Senator Warren, Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin is a real leader in this effort. Senator Sanders is also a leader in this effort. And frankly, I think we will find some colleagues on the other side of the aisle who do understand that this is an untenable situation going forward, and I think we're going to have to find those allies soon.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Good suggestions as always. I think where we can start is really through a good old union internal organizing, right? This is something that I feel like we all aspire to do more of, and I think it really happens through one-on-ones about coworker to coworker about challenges in repaying student loans. There's such a stigma attached to student debt that I think we actually need to use our unions and our workplaces to relinquish some of that stigma. In terms of supporting student worker organizing, I think that so often there's a weird disconnect between students and educators on campuses where I think university administrators and this overwhelming trend of corporatization of higher education sees educators as service providers and students as customers. I think that breaking that weird disconnect so that students who overwhelmingly work in college and their faculty members, the graduate student instructors, the whole lot of campus workers are actually able to unite under the banner of they are all working on campus in some way or another. And then finally, a nut that I've been trying to crack for years now is how to engage, at least in terms of declining state support, is how to engage parent-teacher associations. So often when I was a student lobbying state legislators, they'd say, oh, I mean, parents pay for college costs, like we want to hear from them. And while I think that is totally false, I do actually understand that a lot of parents do pay for some parts of college for traditional students. And I've been trying to figure out how parent-teachers associations could actually be involved in fights for state funding for higher education, because ultimately K-12 or parents of K-12 students will face the increases in tuition, probably the worst for traditional students at least, because they are facing compounding tuition increases that literally exponentially are growing. And so how do we actually engage them maybe through K-12 teachers unions. So that's the thing that I've been wondering for years on end, and if anyone has a good model for it, I would love to hear how to plug into that.
Excellent, thank you.
I'll say this, and it may not be exactly. I think the expert on organizing has the right thing to say about how people can get involved, and so I would defer to what she just said. I think the one thing that has frustrated me about the conversation about where actual individuals that are taking part in higher education and families that may be paying or may have a student is just assuming that people are. I would say a lot of higher education elites assume that people are dumb or that people don't care or that they can kind of use the fact that we don't provide good data and information. And sometimes when I say this, I don't mean to say that I don't think that any of this means that people should be responsible for making college more affordable. I think that government and higher education administrations, like federal, state, and institutions, should be responsible for making college more affordable. But I think to the extent that anyone is inclined, it's a travesty that we haven't for a long time, for instance, provided information about what the average student loan debt is by college, or what your likely repayment amount is to be before you enter. I just think that some of those things, and now that people are starting to ask those questions, states and other people are getting uncomfortable about why, the student debt is the way it is. But I don't think people should have to ask those questions for them to be in that place. And I will say that one of the more frustrating things about being in government was the number of times I would hear higher education leaders say that people don't look at the information, so we shouldn't bother to provide it. I just think it's really disrespectful. It's like, we shouldn't have to tell you because you don't care enough to look at it anyway. And regardless of whether or not it's not your responsibility to use that information to hold their feet to the fire. I don't think students or families should have the responsibility for making college more affordable, but I think it's your right to have that information at your disposal and to ask for it if you want to.
Fantastic. All right, well, our next question is the last one. And actually, again, it's going to be a compilation of a series of questions I'm seeing come up here. Before I ask it, though, I will let you know that it looks like you were maybe tagged in a couple different questions on Twitter that are a little more specific to some of the things you said. So I'll just highlight that. But then a couple other things. And Zakiya, the inspiration for these questions may have actually come from the earlier description you gave of the climbing walls and the lazy rivers, because we have examples of certain things happening. Again, if that's questions along the lines of, if I'm seeing that at my school, what do I do about it right now? Exactly. A couple other specific examples where then the question is kind of what do we do to remedy this or rectify the inequality, right? So we have those examples of what do I do about that if I'm seeing sort of those egregious spending examples on my campus. Also, here's a recent study by Mark Snyder of AIR found that per pupil public subsidies totaled $105,000 at Princeton, mostly in the form of tax breaks on endowment income. Yet, at a nearby community college, the subsidy was $2,400 per pupil. Another example at UNC Chapel Hill was the gutting of certain programs along what looked like purely partisan lines, removing funding from social welfare, labor, and more left-leaning academic departments historically. And how do we ensure that state legislators continue to invest comprehensively in their public universities without creating a dependent power dynamic that affects quality and diversity of education? Again, so how do we remedy or rectify these inequalities that we're seeing right in front of us?
So we do something in higher education that we simply don't accept in K-12 education, which is that we provide the most resources to the wealthiest people, and we provide the least to those who, frankly, their entire lives depend on their access, the access to education. And what I mean by that is that this example that was given about the incredible investments that we are making with public dollars in elite private institutions that admit hardly anyone. We're doing that in droves while underspending on our community colleges, which have to accept anyone who enters and educate them And those are the people in those schools who will derive enormous benefits from being there. I mean, let's be honest. If you grew up in a privileged home with lots of resources and attend great high schools, your college degree isn't changing much for you at all. It is a period of socialization and time where you make wonderful social networks and get access to very elite jobs. That's terrific, but it isn't deserving of taxpayer subsidy. What we're doing right now is very cost-ineffective efforts. We have to get a hold of those dollars and spend them in cost-effective ways where they are needed. And we need people to stand up and say that. Please put state dollars towards community colleges and four-year comprehensive institutions that do not cherry pick their students and that are willing to get larger and grow their enrollment when the demand is there. We have to do that. Unless we do that, we are going to keep doing the same old thing over and over. And yes, we are throwing away an enormous amount of money on Ivy League institutions and other schools that aspire to be Ivy League institutions while they do things like this. I'm not going to name the school, but we have an institution out there that uses federal work-study dollars for something called dorm crew. Dorm crew is where they pay Pell recipients to clean up after other undergraduates as their orientation to college. Yes, they work as maids using work-study dollars. This is not what work-study was intended for, and it is not how our public institutions use the money, but it is how some of our private schools are, and we haven't been willing to take a hard look at them because they're elite and because we're afraid of their lobbyists. We take this on, or we keep throwing money away.
Thanks, Sarah.
It's funny that you mentioned the facilities. I, as a former student government geek, I know that at UW-Madison, each student pays $192 per year for this new fancy union building called Union South that has a climbing wall in it. And one of my first ways that I learned about what unions were as a daughter of two non-unionized workers was working with the Teaching Assistants Association, which is the graduate student union. It's affiliated with AFT, on defeating a proposal for a fancy new gym. So it's kind of funny hearing that question here. And so I mean, my response is that I think the reason why we're spending money this way is because of who has a say in how we spend the money. I think that when we actually or unionize as many campus workers as humanly possible, I think the balance of power actually changes, and who has a say in these decisions actually changes. So with a very disempowered student body, because these student governments are usually just shells for, or just are lapdogs for university administrators, usually. This is when this kind of spending happens, where universities cater to new kinds of quote-unquote customers, and that's how we get this very unequal spending. That's how we get the adjunct crisis. This is how we get a lot of problems because, frankly, students and also faculty and staff are rampantly disempowered because we don't have real unions on campus that can combat this trend towards corporatization.
Thank you. Zakiya, thoughts on how to remedy or rectify these inequalities?
I think many good ideas were raised here today. Senator Warren talked about making there being roles for institutions, for states, and for the federal government, and I think that's the right mix of actors to be doing things differently. I think we've all touched on the need for states to not decrease their investments on higher education and the direct role that plays in what students are charged. So I think that's something that is a disconnect when people see tuition at public colleges going up. You don't think about necessarily the state subsidy part of it, and that is really huge. And so just even being informed about that and tracking that at the state level, I think is very, very important. I do echo kind of Beth Wong's points about just being active on campus and students being active in their who are in college being active in student government. I think about all the students that aren't in college yet, and that's just, or the people that were in college and dropped out at some point because of the price or because of the college not doing a good job at meeting their needs. And so I think asking these questions and the fact that you all are even having this forum and that so many people are kind of awoke, you don't know what you don't know, and so the fact that this is even happening and that people are asking the questions, I think is fabulous. And so I don't have much more to add beyond what's been raised here, and I think a lot of the solutions, even the ones that were posed today, we still have some working out to do on the details of some things in order to make sure that we don't make some of the same mistakes that we've made in the past. But the fact that people are even talking about this issue just gives me a lot of hope. And so I don't say this is something, you should really go to our website and look at the films, but if you're interested and have 15 minutes, I think it could add to your kind of knowledge about the issue. So that's from the other thing I would add.
Excellent. And Lumina Foundation is on Twitter also as Lumina Found.
Yes, they are.
It's all one word.
We are.
So awesome. Well, this has been absolutely terrific. And I actually think closing with that final statement, Zakia, is really helpful in just naming the sort of the layers where we should be having this conversation, right? Locally on the campus, at the state level, at the federal level. Beth, you certainly added to that as well with how students play a role, how you yourself played a role. I think hopefully that is incredibly inspiring to the students who are with us today as well, the current students, as well as those recent alumni who can still be active on campus. And Sarah, I really appreciate the role you play as a tenured faculty, as a researcher, and also using that lens to understand the role parents can play. And Beth, you've been touching on parent-teacher associations and the role K-12 Teachers Union can play. What I love, including what Senator Warren said earlier about the role she expects Congress to play in this work, is really that among us all, there is really no one who doesn't have a role to play in making college affordable. So if there is one marching order out of that, it is actually just find your place and start working. And then, at some point, let's hopefully reconvene in some sort of celebration of, first degree free or of comprehensive college affordability, because we have work to do, but we absolutely have a vision for what we want in making college more affordable for working class and especially the poor. So thank you so much for your participation today.